Disclaimer: this story contains mature themes intended for adult viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the ceiling fan. Morning light streamed through the curtains, soft and golden, falling across my bare shoulders as I reached for the towel hanging on the chair. The air was still warm from the shower, scented with vanilla soap and steam. I bent down to grab the panties that had slipped to the floor, completely unaware of the pair of eyes standing frozen by the half-open door. A small sound, a breath caught in the throat, made me stop. I turned my head just slightly, my heart skipping. For a moment, everything slowed. He stood there, wide-eyed, frozen in surprise, lips parted as if trying to speak but failing. My breath hitched, and the towel in my hand trembled slightly. I could feel the rush of heat rising up my neck, the air suddenly heavy between us. Neither of us moved. His eyes darted away, then back again, unable to hide what he felt. And something about that look, that raw, startled softness, made my heartbeat stutter. I quickly clutched the towel to my chest, pretending to be calm, but inside I was shaking. It wasn't just shock, it was something else. Something unspoken that neither of us dared to name. He muttered, I didn't mean to, but stopped, his voice barely above a whisper. It's okay, I said, though my voice didn't sound steady. The silence that followed was thick, electric. A strange tension filled the space, not anger, not shame, something deeper, confusing, and undeniable. He stepped back, his hands still on the doorknob, eyes flicking once more toward me as if torn between leaving and staying. The look he gave me lingered long after the door gently clicked shut. I stood there, wrapped in the towel, heart pounding so hard I could feel it echoing in my ears. I pressed a hand to my chest, breathing unevenly, staring at the closed door. What just happened? Why did it feel like something had changed, something that neither of us could ever take back? The faint creak of the stairs told me he hadn't gone far. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if I wanted him to. The morning lingered in a haze of golden light, and I found myself sitting on the edge of the bed, towels still wrapped loosely around me, replaying the moment over and over. His wide-eyed glance at me wasn't just shock, there was something else there, something that made my pulse quicken. It was frightening and thrilling all at once. For weeks, I had been noticing little things about him, the way he lingered in the kitchen when I was around, the subtle brush of his hand when passing by, or the way his eyes seemed to search for me even when I wasn't looking. At first, I chalked it up to curiosity, maybe admiration, but now I wasn't so sure. There was a tension between us, fragile but undeniable, a line we both hovered around but never crossed. He was my stepson, yes, and that complicated everything. But he wasn't just a reminder of boundaries, he had become a living puzzle, one that sparked emotions I hadn't expected. I found myself thinking about him in quiet moments, the way his laugh could make the room feel warmer, the subtle confidence in the way he carried himself, the way he always seemed to notice when I was unsettled. I had tried to dismiss it, tried to convince myself it was just maternal affection, but deep down, I knew that rationalizations were failing me. And I could feel it in him too. That moment in the doorway had been brief, but charged, a silent confession neither of us dared voice. I remembered how his breath had caught, how he had stepped back with a nervous hesitation, almost like he was afraid of his own desires. That hesitation, it mirrored my own. We had always shared a polite, careful relationship, polite smiles at breakfast, small talk over household chores, occasional fleeting touches when handing off items or closing doors. But beneath that, there had always been unspoken questions, subtle glances, and quiet moments that lingered longer than they should. And now, it felt like the dam had cracked, just slightly, and something new had begun to seep through. I couldn't help but replay the memory again, the curve of his shoulders in the doorway, the way his hands had trembled, the almost imperceptible shift in his stance as if he was both drawn in and trying to resist. My own pulse raced at the recollection, cheeks flushing despite my best attempts at composure. The tension wasn't just physical, it was emotional, a quiet storm brewing between us. It was dangerous, yes, but also intoxicating. We hadn't crossed any lines yet, but each glance, each accidental brush of skin, felt like a spark in a room full of kindling. I rose from the bed, walking over to the window and staring out at the garden, trying to steady my thoughts. But even as the sunlight warmed my back, I knew one thing: nothing would ever feel the same between us again. Something had shifted, and neither of us could pretend it hadn't. The question now was whether we would let it grow, or let it burn out quietly. The evening descended quietly, painting the room in muted amber and shadows. I was in the kitchen, preparing a simple cup of tea, when I sensed him watching me again. He leaned casually against the doorway, pretending to be relaxed, but there was an intensity in his gaze that made it impossible to ignore. I felt it in my chest, a fluttering mix of anticipation and guilt that twisted my stomach. He smiled, just slightly, and I noticed the subtle tension in his posture. It was almost playful, yet edged with something darker, something that hinted at the thoughts he didn't voice. I felt my own pulse spike, noticing how his presence made the mundane act of making tea feel charged, alive. A quiet heat crept up my neck and cheeks, and I found myself aware of every movement, the tilt of his head, the brush of his sleeve, the way his eyes followed mine. "I didn't mean to bother you," he said softly, though his tone didn't match the look in his eyes. It was a challenge, an unspoken dare. My heart raced faster, and I could feel a flush creeping down my arms. It's okay," I replied, trying to sound casual. My words stumbled over themselves, betraying my own nervousness. The air between us felt thick, electric. There was something in the way he lingered, just close enough for the warmth of him to brush against me, that stirred a forbidden longing I tried desperately to deny. A pang of jealousy hit me suddenly, sharp and startling. He had been chatting casually with a friend earlier, laughing and smiling so freely, and now I realized how much I hated the idea of him sharing that energy with anyone else. I wanted it all to be here, in this quiet tension between us, this stolen moment of proximity that made my thoughts race. We exchanged no more than a few words, but each glance and movement carried weight. His presence was magnetic, pulling me closer even as every rational thought screamed that it was impossible, forbidden. Yet the temptation, unspoken, simmering, hovered like a storm on the horizon, ready to break. As the room grew darker and the shadows deepened, the silence stretched, heavy with longing, fear, and desire. Every second felt like a heartbeat away from something irreversible. We were teetering on the edge, both of us aware that one careless move could change everything. The house was quiet, every creak of the floorboards amplified in the stillness of the night. I found myself in the living room, rearranging a few things after dinner, when I realized he was there too, not in the doorway this time, but closer, lingering near the couch as if drawn by the same invisible force that pulled at me. Our eyes met, and for a moment, words failed us. I could feel the tension stretching between us like a taut wire. His presence was overwhelming, each subtle movement magnified, the brush of his sleeve against his side, the slight tilt of his head, the way he shifted his weight as if unsure whether to step closer or back away. I felt my pulse spike, a flush creeping up my neck and arms, and my breath caught in my chest. "You stayed up late?" I asked, my voice almost too soft. "Couldn't sleep," he replied, eyes never leaving mine. There was a charge in the air that neither of us could deny. Every glance, every heartbeat seemed to pull us closer, an invisible magnet drawing us into a space neither of us wanted to escape. We moved around each other carefully, aware of every small gesture, the accidental touch of hands as I passed him a book, the brush of shoulders as I adjusted the lamp. Each contact was electric, a spark that left us both startled and wanting more. I could feel the tension building in my chest, a pressure that was both thrilling and terrifying. The house felt smaller suddenly, every room shrinking until all that existed was the space between us. His eyes lingered on me, searching, questioning, teasing. My own gaze was bold now, daring him to cross the invisible line we'd skirted for weeks. And then, just as the tension felt unbearable, he moved a fraction closer. The air thickened. My heartbeat raced, and I felt the deliciously dangerous edge of anticipation. We were so close now, the space between us charged with unspoken words and forbidden desire. He stopped, mere inches from me, his breath warm, eyes locked on mine. I could feel his hesitation, the moment suspended, fragile and electric. And in that pause, everything hung in the balance, one move, one word, and nothing would ever be the same again. Then, a sudden sound from the hall made both of us freeze. The moment shattered, but not completely. The question remained, what would happen next? The night was heavy with tension, the kind that makes every small sound feel deafening. We stood in the living room, the dim light from the lamp painting our faces in warm amber shadows. The air between us had been taut for hours, and I could feel the electricity in every glance, every subtle movement. My heart raced, and I sensed that he felt the same, the unspoken words and hidden longing hanging thick in the air. I need to tell you something, he said, voice low and urgent. His eyes didn't waver, though his hands fidgeted slightly at his sides. I felt a shiver run through me. What is it? I asked cautiously, though my chest felt tight, anticipating what was coming. He stepped closer, the space between us smaller than it had ever been. I've been feeling things I shouldn't, he admitted, voice trembling slightly. I didn't know how to say it, and I didn't want to make things awkward, but I can't pretend anymore. The words hit me like a jolt of electricity. Everything we had been dancing around for weeks, every fleeting glance, every accidental brush of hands, suddenly made sense. My chest tightened, a mix of fear and excitement flooding through me. I had been feeling it too, the same tension, the same pull, and hearing him confess it out loud was both terrifying and thrilling. Before I could respond, there was a sudden creak behind us, a sound that made both of us spin. The door to the study was ajar, and through the crack, I saw something that made my stomach drop. There, holding a folder of letters and photographs, was my husband. His expression was unreadable, a mix of surprise and something else I couldn't place. You too, he stammered, his voice low but sharp. Everything froze. The energy between us, so carefully controlled, snapped into chaos. The attraction we had been holding in check now collided with fear and the risk of being discovered. My pulse thundered, my mind raced, and yet, beneath it all, the tension of forbidden attraction hadn't completely dissipated, it had transformed into something more complicated, more charged. We were caught, not by our feelings, but by circumstance. And in that moment, the raw, unspoken connection between us became even more urgent, a dangerous spark in a room full of secrets and unvoiced desires. One step, one glance, one choice could change everything. And as we all stood there, locked in a moment that would be impossible to forget, I realized that nothing would ever be the same again. The room was thick with silence, heavy and suffocating, after the shocking revelation. My chest felt tight, as if each heartbeat were a drum echoing the tension in the air. My husband's eyes burned with a mixture of anger, confusion, and betrayal, while the young man beside me looked as though he had been pulled apart from the inside, guilt etched into every line of his face. I didn't mean for it to go this far, he stammered, voice shaking, his hands clenched at his sides. You didn't mean for it to go this far, my husband repeated, each word a dagger. Do you know what this means? What you've done? His gaze snapped between us, sharp and unrelenting. I felt a surge of emotion I couldn't suppress, frustration, fear, longing, all tangled together. Please, stop shouting, I said, voice trembling but steady. We didn't act on anything. None of it has gone further than the feelings. For a moment, the room fell into an uneasy quiet. The air seemed to hold its breath, waiting for someone to break the tension. And then it hit me, I couldn't let this linger in ambiguity. I had to make a choice, and I had to be honest, no matter the risk. I need you both to understand, I said firmly, my heart pounding. We've felt something, yes. But it's complicated, confusing. We didn't plan this, and we didn't act. But it's real, and ignoring it won't make it go away. My husband's expression softened slightly, though suspicion still lingered. Real? He asked cautiously. Yes, I replied, taking a deep breath. We're human. We feel things. But we're also capable of control, of choice. And now we have to decide what comes next, together, honestly, without hiding from each other. The young man looked at me, relief and fear mingling in his eyes. I just didn't want to hurt anyone, he admitted quietly. I know, I said, placing a calming hand on his arm. And now that everything is out, we can face it. Not act recklessly, but acknowledge it, understand it, and find a path forward. The room felt lighter somehow, tension still lingering but now tempered by honesty. The confrontation had been brutal, but it had forced clarity, and clarity brought the chance for resolution. For the first time, the weight on my chest lifted slightly, the danger, the secret, the electric pull between us, it no longer needed to dominate in silence. And as we stood there, faces still taut with emotion, I realized that while the storm wasn't over, we had survived its first wave. Now came the moment where hearts could choose, where connections could be defined not by fear or guilt, but by truth. The morning sun filtered softly through the curtains, casting a warm glow across the room. The tension of the previous night still lingered faintly in the air, but it had shifted into something gentler, something tender, reflective, and hopeful. I sat on the edge of the bed, tracing patterns absent-mindedly on the quilt, my heart still racing but in a different way now, a steady rhythm of relief and quiet anticipation. He entered the room quietly, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. Our eyes met, and for the first time in weeks, there was no fear, no guilt, no tension, only a shared understanding that had been forged through honesty and courage. He handed me the mug with a shy smile, his fingers brushing mine ever so lightly. That simple touch sent a ripple of warmth through me. Good morning, he whispered. Good morning, I replied, smiling, my voice soft but filled with affection. The room felt smaller, intimate, cocooned in light and quiet understanding. No words were needed to bridge the gap between us, the silent connection spoke volumes. We sat together on the bed, sipping coffee, shoulders occasionally brushing, sharing glances that carried both comfort and something deeper, a recognition of the closeness we had dared to explore, now anchored in trust and honesty. The emotional storm of the previous night had left its mark, but instead of fear, it had left room for warmth, tenderness, and connection. He leaned slightly closer, resting his head lightly against my shoulder, and I felt a calm settle over me, a sense of rightness that had been absent for so long. I'm glad we faced everything, he murmured. Me too, I replied, my hand finding his and holding it gently. It was scary, but worth it. And in that quiet moment, we shared a soft, unspoken promise, a bond built not on impulsive desire but on mutual respect, honesty, and the vulnerability that had brought us here. It wasn't a reckless connection anymore, it was a tender, enduring closeness that could weather anything. The sunlight grew brighter, spilling across our intertwined hands, bathing us in warmth. We laughed softly at nothing in particular, the tension of the past replaced by lightness and joy. For the first time, the future felt open, full of possibility, a story we would write together, moment by moment, heart to heart. And as we leaned into the comfort of each other's presence, I realized that this was the kind of connection that stayed quiet, strong, and beautifully enduring.